Welcome back, everyone. We have to take one final detour before we start writing some actual code. So in this video, we're going to be taking our first real look at this Linux-based virtual machine that we'll do all of our work in, as well as introducing VS Code, the Integrated Development Environment, or IDE, that we're going to be writing our code in. I have a video already published that shows exactly how to set this virtual machine up. You should see a pop-up on your video screen now, and I'll leave a link in the description below. I would highly suggest you go and set it up real fast and then come back to this video if you haven't already. This environment is a Linux-based environment, which is just a different operating system than Windows or Mac. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's a common environment that a lot of developers prefer. It gives us the ability to all be working in the same environment, no matter what the actual machine we're on, and because with it we can experiment without worrying about damaging our computer. I could keep naming the benefits of this environment, but I highly suggest you set it up for yourself so that you can follow along as closely as possible. It's not a difficult setup, and it's going to teach you about an operating system that you're probably not familiar with yet. Here I am in my virtual Ubuntu environment, and the first thing I need to do is to sign in. So I'm going to enter my password. And then I'm going to open up a terminal. Now we configured this shortcut when we set up this environment in the last video, and when using Linux, it's very efficient to use this terminal or command line interface as opposed to the GUI or the graphical user interface. And many programmers will come to prefer this terminal when they see how powerful it can be. So with this terminal, we can enter commands that it's going to prompt the computer to do things. Now, this terminal may look pretty intimidating because there are no instructions really, just this seemingly empty box with this blinking cursor and some strange words before it. So let's just break this down a little bit. The first thing you're going to see is the user ID. And each user defined on the machine will have their own unique user ID. Next, you're going to see this @, which is just a delimiter, and it's similar to the @ in our email address. Next, you'll see the name of the machine or the host name. In my case, it's csrowdy-virtualbox. This is my host name, and it's going to be followed by this colon, which again is just a delimiter separating this user ID at host name from the file path, which is going to be this blue tilde right here. And this blue tilde is just a shorthand notation for my current directory or my current folder. Now, this might be going right over your head, but don't worry, we'll understand this more when we see some examples. And lastly, you'll see a $, which is a symbol that indicates that this is a prompt that we can type instructions at. By default, in this operating system called Ubuntu, we're running on a user account. This is opposed to an administrator account, or in the Linux world, the root account. We can access this root account if we wanted to, and if we did, this $, would be a hash symbol instead. And that would just indicate that we are running commands on the root account. Now, this is typically a bad practice because the root account doesn't have any type of protections, and it can basically do anything you want to the machine, including things that might break the machine. So we won't be using the root account if we don't have to. Now, the first instruction or command that I want to teach you is the pwd command, and this stands for print working directory. You'll sometimes hear this called present working directory. However, print working directory is the technically correct term. You'll notice that these commands we're going to be using tend to be shorthand or acronyms for common things that we might want to do on a computer. So if we typed pwd and hit enter, the terminal is going to print out, in my case, /home/csrowdy. And this is equivalent to just like looking at your file explorer like you would on a Windows or a Mac. And we can do that here as well, so we can see exactly what these commands are doing. I'll just minimize this real quick, and if I open my file explorer, this is pretty much the equivalent of that pwd command. It's just going to show us the home folder that we're at right here. Now the next command is going to let us list the contents of this directory. And it's just ls, short for list. And when we type ls and we hit enter, we can see all the files and folders in this directory. And you can think of the word folder and directory as the same thing. When we typed pwd, we wanted to see what folder we were in or what directory we were in. The two words can be used interchangeable. In Linux, we typically call folders directories. We can see that the directories are highlighted in blue and our files will just be in plain white text. If we wanted to change directories or open up one of these quote-unquote folders or directories, we could use the cd command, followed by the name of the directory that we want to change to. For example, if I wanted to move into the desktop directory, I could type cd and desktop. And when I hit enter, nothing appears to happen, but I have this blue file path right here, showing that we're now in the desktop. And this brings up an important aspect of Linux. Linux is case sensitive, meaning desktop with an uppercase D and desktop with a lowercase d are not the same. So when you type stuff in the terminal, you have to be aware of the case of the letters. And if I just go back real quick, and then I try to cd into desktop with a lowercase d, you can see no such file or directory exists. So we have to be very particular in the way we type these. And this is just to say that this blue text you see between the colon and your prompt is the current directory that you are in. The tilde, again, is just shorthand notation for the home folder. So our current directory would be /home/csrowdy/desktop, and we can double check this by typing pwd. And again, this is pretty much equivalent to like double clicking on our desktop in our file explorer. And we can see if we run ls over here, there's nothing in it. Now, some of these commands like cd and ls can also be supplied arguments or other commands that'll change the action of this command. For example, the cd command also took an argument or the directory that we wanted to change into. We can give the cd command the double dot argument, which is shorthand for moving backwards in the directory tree. So just like I did earlier, to go back, I can type cd and dot dot and hit enter. And then if I type pwd to see my directory, I'm back in home/rowdy. And with these few commands of pwd, print working directory, or present working directory, cd, or change directory, and ls, or list, we can now navigate our file system. We could start at the root folder, for example, which is similar to the C drive in Windows, by typing cd and a slash. This is going to change the directory into a directory named slash, which is our root directory, or as high as we can go in the directory tree. And now we can type ls and we can see everything in here. And we can kind of start to poke around if we wanted to. We could go deeper into these folders and we can back out of them. Now we're not going to be going down the rabbit hole and looking at all these files and directories just yet, but with these commands we can start to look around. So take some time, try poking around in this terminal using these commands, and if at any time you get stuck, you can always type cd just by itself with no arguments, and it's going to return you to your home folder, your tilde folder. And we can see that right here. And this is kind of equivalent to just closing out of the terminal and then opening up a new one. One command that you might want to be familiar with is the clear command. So if we have something on the screen, let's say ls, and we just type clear, it's going to clear our terminal. So there's only a couple more commands that we need to go over before we can start writing some actual code, which I know you're eager to get started on. So let's type cd by itself and make sure that we're in our home folder or our home directory. And we want to make a directory here that we can start to put all of our code in when we start to write it. To do this, we can use the mkdir command, followed by the directory name we want it to make. and I'll name mine tutorials. So if I type mkdir and tutorials, when I hit enter, it's going to create a folder named tutorials. And feel free to name yours whatever you want, but by convention, it's best practice to use simple one-word names. And if you need to use 2 words for whatever reason, you separate them by an underscore. So if I wanted to make this YouTube tutorials, I would do an underscore in between the 2 words. In my case, I'm just going to do tutorials. And when I hit enter, it would seem nothing happens. But if I now type ls to list everything in this directory, you'll see that I have this directory called tutorials. And now I can change into that directory by using cd tutorials and hitting enter. You can see my prompt change, and if I type ls again, we can see there's nothing in here yet. So the mkdir command created a new empty directory called tutorials. And finally, we're going to see one last command. This isn't a Linux command per se, but really it comes with that program VS Code that we downloaded when we configured this virtual machine. So if I just type code, space, and then a period, and hit enter, VS Code's going to open up in this current directory. Now this might take a minute or two if it's your first time opening it up. However, we can see here on the left under our Explorer that we have this tutorials. And this is a folder. I'm just going to click yes, I trust the authors, exit out of this, and we can see that this is an empty folder called tutorials with nothing in it. And this is where we've opened up Visual Studio Code to. But we do have these little icons next to it, and the first one says new file. Let's click this and see what happens. Well, it's going to open this text box and it wants us to give a name to the file. So let's call this one test.txt and just create a text file and hit enter. And we can see that it's opened up this text file over here on our right, and we can type stuff in here. Now, if we wanted to save this file, we could hit Control and S on our keyboard and that'll save it. We can also come up here to File and hit Save, and that'll do it. However, that gets a little tedious after a while, so I would get comfortable with the shortcut. So let's go ahead and close out of all of this, and we'll start from scratch. Now I'll open up a fresh terminal by clicking the icon, or by using the shortcut Control-Alt-T, and I'll type ls to list out everything in my current directory. I want to change directory into this tutorials folder. So I'll type cd and then tutorials, and I'll hit enter. I can type ls again to see what's in here if I wanted, but I just want to open up my text editor in this folder, so I'll just type code and dot. And I'll see my file explorer on the left and my file open on the right. Now, just to be clear, this is the exact same thing as doing this from the GUI, so let's see that in action. I'll close out of this all again. And I'll do the same thing using the GUI. So I would click on my folder to explore, and then I would right click on this tutorials, and I would say open with other application, Visual Studio Code, and select. And that's going to do the exact same thing. Either way of doing this is fine, but you're going to be using this terminal more and more. So the more you use it, the more comfortable it's going to become. So I want to bring up one important topic real quick. We've used this ls command by itself, but just like the cd command, we can supply arguments to this command. For example, if we wanted to list the files and directories in a specific directory that we know exists, then we can pass an argument to the ls command. Let's see what I mean by this. I'm going to exit back out of this and open a terminal. And earlier we created this directory called tutorials, and we created a file called test.txt. Since we know the file path, we can use this ls command followed by the path to list all the directories and files in that path. So if I type ls and tutorials, what's printed out the contents of that directory, which in this case is just test.txt. However, we didn't have to change into that directory first to see what was there. And I'm going to bring this model back, and we've seen this model used over and over, and I want you to see how relevant this actually is. We can think of ls now as being an algorithm, but really a function because it's the implementation of an algorithm. The computer is taking action, and this function takes as input a file path, be it tutorials, and as output it's going to print out the contents of that file path. And in this case, all we have there is the one file that we created of test.txt, but you can see that this model can be applied to so many problems in this field, specifically with what are known as functions, or again, the implementation of an algorithm. So this is going to be all for this video. I hope you have a better understanding of this environment that we're going to be using, and in the next video, we'll take our first look at the C programming language and see how we can start to write some code ourselves. So thank you all so much for watching, and if you got some value out of this video, make sure to hit that like button so that I know you want to see more content like this in the future.